Hi everyone, good afternoon or good morning depending on where you are. This is Ben Stone, Director of Arts and Culture for Transportation for America. We are going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Hopefully you all are here for a webinar, informational webinar on the Arts, Culture, and Transportation Fellowship. If not, feel free to stay tuned in any way to learn about this new opportunity. As I mentioned, I am Ben, Director of Arts and Culture for our organization, Transportation for America, as well as our parent organization, Smart Growth America, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment. Our goals for today, as it says on the screen, is to quickly introduce who we are. Hopefully, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Smart Growth America and Transportation for America, but just in case, we'll give you a quick background. Tell you a little bit about the arts and culture work we've been doing up to this point over the last 3+ years. Again, many of you are probably familiar with that work as well. We'll introduce you to our state-of-the-art DIY toolkit and explain what we've been up to with that work, and then introduce our ACT Fellowship program. Smart Growth America, as many of you know, is an umbrella organization under which sit quite a few different programs, all branded somewhat separately. Our program we're here talking about today is really part of Transportation for America, which, as the name implies, of course, focuses on transportation projects. But Smart Growth America's family includes the Form-Based Code Institute, Local Leaders Council, the National Complete Streets Coalition, SSTI, the State Smart Transportation Initiative. And we bring together a number of different experts in transportation planning and design, community planning and development, urban design, zoning, so on and so forth, to really tackle the issues that relate to planning and development in our communities around the country from all different kinds of angles, which of course includes arts and culture as well. Transportation for America is our program that, as I mentioned, focuses on transportation. We have our mission and vision statement on the screen right there. Won't read them to you. You can go ahead and do that yourself. But just mention, many folks know us largely for doing work, mostly at the federal level on advocacy work, mostly on state policy work as well. But a lot of folks don't know quite as much about our local level work, which is, of course, what we're here to talk about today. Quite a bit of that work happens through many of our partners with the National Complete Streets Coalition and happens through our arts and culture team as well. And we increasingly work to either fund or support in other kinds of ways through technical assistance, transportation projects that are impacting folks at the city level and even individually at the neighborhood level too. Our arts and culture team is profiled on our parent organization, Smart Growth America. You can all look that up under smartgrowthamerica.org if you go to programs and arts and culture. We have a number of new programs. I won't go into all of them today, but I will cover a couple of our other new programs today. We have a somewhat regular blog series on there, somewhat regular webinar series on there as well. And hopefully you all have been following that work along as we've been moving through a number of different projects. So to give you a little bit of background, and I will confess I took these 3 questions from our partners at Our Place America, one of our main partners and funders of a lot of the work you'll be hearing about in a few minutes. We really work to answer a few different questions. One, what are the key needs in transportation that arts and culture can address? And I'll talk about some of the work we've done to address that question in just a moment. Why isn't arts and culture currently being incorporated more than it already is into transportation? In other words, what are the barriers to doing this kind of work? Answering that question is largely what led to some of the programs I'll talk about in a minute, as well as the ACT Fellowship. And then finally, what can we do to advance that kind of work, advance more arts and culture being incorporated into transportation projects, which again takes the form of this fellowship program, but as well as that, also some other programs like our state-of-the-art transportation training and our former program, the Cultural Corridor Consortium. The work that we do then to answer those questions and to support the other teams here within Smart Growth America is that we support the incorporation of art in transportation projects to create exemplary case studies. So we go out and actually work with communities to create projects we can tell other folks about, to be the best kinds of case studies we can find. We study this incorporation of art into transportation projects so we can talk about it effectively, show videos, show photos, tell stories to explain what the benefit of working in this way is. And then finally, we train practitioners and connect peers to expand this field of working at the intersection of art, culture, and transportation, which of course is really what the ACT Fellowship is all about. Almost all of this work really grew out of the work we did with our partners at Our Place America in first researching and then producing our arts, culture, and transportation field scan. If you've ever tuned in to some of our past webinars, you've probably heard me talk about this in quite a bit of detail, but this work really looked at answering that first question I mentioned, all the different ways that arts and culture and artists and arts administrators and designers and performers can go about supporting transportation professionals and solving transportation challenges. And we, through all of our research, came up with these 7 different solutions, 7 different ways that artists can support transportation projects. And that's really formed the basis for all the work we've done since then. Some of that work includes the Cultural Corridor Consortium, a program that ran from 2016 through 2018. We worked in 6 different cities over those few years, all shown on the screen there. And we worked in these cities to provide some funding through our partners at the Kresge Foundation, as well as some technical assistance and some connecting of people in different cities to support projects in, for example, Nashville and San Diego. In Nashville, we worked with all the partners listed on the screen there, including some public agencies and nonprofits focused on Nolensville Pike, a commercial arterial road in South Nashville, really focused on what I would describe as a complete streets project, which led to the development and still is leading to the development of a new park, new bus rapid transit, new road diet on Nolensville Pike, as well as an anti-displacement plan for that corridor. We take a rather holistic approach to these projects, as you can imagine. In San Diego, another complete street style project, which also included a bus rapid transit component, working with a primarily Somali community in northeast corner of San Diego. In Indianapolis, working with a number of different partners on preparing for the opening of the new, again, BRT, bus rapid transit project, the Red Line, as well as planning for the future Purple Line, which is still in the planning phases, and bringing an arts and cultural lens to getting people ready for this first BRT line in Indy, as well as planning for the next one. And then finally, another project in Dothan, Alabama, a road redesign of East Main Street, the eastern part of the city, which stretches into the suburbs and into the rural context of the Wiregrass region of Alabama. Worked with an artist in residence to help the city reach out to the community to figure out what they wanted to see in this project. Just a few examples of some of the way we work. And that then grew into a next program, which we've just wrapped up, the state-of-the-art transportation trainings, where we worked in Mariposa, California, Bozeman, Montana, and Buffalo, New York. Featured those in a former past webinar, as well as a number of blog posts. The program run by us and funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. And this project is very related to the ACT Fellowship, because the ACT Fellowship is really, the fellowship itself is part 1 of this new project, and then part 2 is to work with some of the people who are graduating from the fellowship to then run future versions of this training. And I'll talk about that more as we move through this webinar. This opportunity was very similar to the ACT Fellowship in that we required partnerships between different agencies in these jurisdictions that are responsible for managing or planning transportation systems, as well as local arts agencies coming together, figuring out how to work together more effectively than they had been in the past. Another program, brand new program, is the Minnesota Department of Transportation Artist in Residence program. We're also running a similar program at the Washington State DOT. And I put this up here because just in case any of you who are listening to this webinar happen to be someone who identifies as an artist and you're based in Minnesota, or maybe you know of artists in Minnesota, this application is still open as well. Deadline for this opportunity is May 1st, so coming up pretty soon. You can find that application form on our website. The URL is on the bottom of the screen there. And with this program, as well as the Washington State DOT, we are embedding artists within these DOTs to really first do a series of rotations to explore what it is that state DOTs even do, answer some of those previous questions, figure out what it is that artists can bring to the table to help state DOTs do their work more effectively, communicate with their constituents more effectively, design projects more effectively, and so on and so forth. And then those artists will have an opportunity to actually work on projects for the remainder of those fellowships. So if you're interested in that, especially if you're based in Minnesota, that program is only open to artists based in Minnesota. Encourage you to look into that opportunity. So today we're going to talk about the ACT Fellowship, of course, getting to our current project. We are running this program for a number of reasons, and before I jump into the why you should apply, I'll just talk a little bit more broadly about what the program is. The fellowship is not too different from the trainings we've done in the past, but it's almost the inverse of those trainings. Instead of myself and our team going out and meeting with people in their own communities, we're bringing people together. So rather than us going somewhere, we're bringing you all together. There'll be a more intentional opportunity for different cities to learn from one another. We'll, of course, bring in outside experts from a number of different cities, some of our own internal team within the Smart Growth America family. And we'll get together 3 times in 3 different cities. We haven't yet determined where those cities will be, what the host cities will be. We have some ideas. We're sorting that out now. We do have the date set, so I encourage you to look at the dates. I'll show those in just a few minutes. And the goal is really to bring together people who might be working together, might be thinking about working together, are interested in exploring how the folks responsible for managing a local arts agency or arts nonprofits could collaborate with people who are involved in supporting the transportation systems in that town. Maybe have started working together but are really looking to bring it to the next level. Those are the kinds of teams we're really looking to bring on and bring them together 3 times in person and 3 times for virtual trainings. At the end of that, we will then select some of the folks. This is not a requirement, of course, but we will use some of the folks who graduate from the fellowship to then become part of our teams to go out and run future trainings in new communities. We'll have an open call for that. We'll have new cities apply to get workshops brought to their communities, and fellows will then be part of our team, bringing what they learn through the fellowship to additional communities. So you'll both learn how to do this work in your own community, but then you'll also learn how to turn around and apply that work to supporting people in other jurisdictions around the country. We're looking for people who have specific projects. This is not necessarily the kind of thing you would come to if you have a hypothetical idea or hypothetical interest in working together, but ideally you have a real tangible project that you can use as your case study over the course of the year. The fellowship is designed around bringing a real project so you can really focus on it through critiques, through charrettes, through brainstorming ideas with the other people in the fellowship, rather than just speaking hypothetically. So you should apply if any of the things I've said so far sounds appealing, and of course if the things on the screen right now sound appealing. If you're interested in learning through a curated fellowship cohort from other peers in other cities who are tackling similar issues. If you're interested in being mentored by national experts, if you're interested in bringing your project to hands-on in-person convenings like I just mentioned, if you're interested in gaining access to our network of other people we've worked with in the past, we are a continually growing family. Once you work with us, you never fully escape. We're constantly going back to the places we've worked and using them as examples of all the cities I mentioned earlier, plus many, many others that we've worked with in the past, both through the arts and culture team, but also some of our other programs. You'll be part of that network, and we'll be able to direct you to people who can hopefully answer any questions you have that come up. We hope to share the work that you do through our network. It's a good opportunity to signal boost, let people know about the great work that you're doing through our webinars, our emails, and our social media. And finally, as I mentioned, you'll be able to apply, some of you will be able to apply what you've learned to the delivery of technical assistance through the workshops after the fellowship ends. The things you'll be required to do, so this is what you should look at to make sure you're willing to take all this on before applying, is that there will be 3 online and 3 in-person convenings, like I mentioned. There will be some homework. The homework will not be too strenuous. It'll really just be to make sure you're getting together with your team in between our meetings so that the work doesn't just happen when we're all physically together, but also continues to happen in between our meetings. We'd love your help with documenting the process. We'll be doing some of that ourselves, but we can't be there every time you all get together or every time the project opens or reaches a milestone. Interested in having some of you work on our workshops in the future. Definitely want to do an evaluation component at the end to make sure what we did was useful, so we can always tweak things for future rounds of this kind of work. And then perhaps the most important one, which is a requirement we have for a lot of our different fellowship type programs or learning academies, if any of you have participated in them with some of our other programs, is that you, by joining the fellowship or taking on the fellowship, you agree to a presentation to your city's mayor's office or whatever the equivalent leadership office is about this work. And this is something we often require of all the different fellowships and learning academies that we do, because we want to make sure that while we're training 2 or 3 or 4 of you, that work then bubbles up to the people making the key decisions. And it's a good way to really have us help you force your way in the door of the key decision makers about the work that you're learning about, and hopefully give you some credibility to continue doing this work after the fellowship ends. Selection criteria is really based on what's on here, and I should mention all of these different questions, or all these different criteria are listed on our website under the application page. The merits of the people applying, both individually and as a team, are rather important. Professional qualifications, the portfolio of work that you've all done. I'd say we're looking for a team of people who are not brand new to this work. This is not something you've just heard about today for the first time and you're thinking about doing for the first time. We don't necessarily need people who are the world's experts. We're looking for people who have started doing this work and could use some support to do even more. That's helpful. We are looking for people who are good at crossing different lines in terms of different cultures, different disciplines, able to talk to people who are rather different than themselves, trained differently perhaps. And then rather importantly, we're looking for people who can commit to the dates of the in-person convenings, which again, I'll show you in just a moment. Eligibility, the teams that we're requiring can be teams of either 2 people, 3 people, or 4 people. There's no advantage or disadvantage of choosing a team of 2, 3, or 4 people. It's really up to all of you. We didn't want to set the exact number and then have you all say, well, it's too many or too few, so we're being a little bit flexible on that. It's really up to you to determine who can actually make it and who would benefit from this. What is not up for negotiation is the fact that you do need at least one person within the team who is representing an agency or an organization that has some authority over transportation planning and or management, so someone from the transportation side of things, as well as one other person with an arts background. It could be an arts administrator, it could be an artist, it could be just somebody working for the local arts agency. And then the 3rd or 4th person is more of a wild card. It could be somebody working for a CDC or someone working for a nonprofit involved in these issues as well. Local elected officials are great as well if they can commit to the travel too. Should also mention, this question's come up a few times, this is not the sort of fellowship where you leave your job and then become a fellow for a year and then go back to your job afterwards. It's only 3 in-person convenings, so everyone's expected to hopefully stay in their current role in their job, and the fellowship is basically an add-on to that. So we're not taking away from your work. We hope that you'll continue doing your work, and this is meant as a bonus to what you're currently doing in your day job. Our tentative schedule is listed on the screen there. I won't read through all of this, but the most important components here are the in-person, most important things on here is the deadline. We have May 1st listed here. We're actually going to extend that to May 8th. You'll see that on our website now or possibly in the near future. So if any of you have thought about applying for this and you're thinking it's not quite enough time to get your team together, you don't think you'll be able to actually apply by May 1st, you have a little bit of extra time, so keep that in mind. May 8th will be the deadline. We are going to notify everybody by the end of May. We will begin with a virtual meeting on July 9th. Our first in-person convening, again, location to be determined, will be August 6th and 7th. Second one will be October 22nd to 23rd. And the final in-person convening will be at the end of January, January 28th to 29th. We'll then transition from there over to picking people to work on the trainings in the future after that, which will begin in the winter of 2020. And all this information is on our website as well. This is what the application form looks like. There are, not surprisingly, other questions beyond what you see on the screen here. This is just the start. We're going to ask you more than just your city and town and population and number of people on your team, but we don't think it's an incredibly arduous application process. The questions are pretty straightforward. It's important to make sure you have your team together before applying. You'll have to list everybody on the team and include background information on those folks before you apply. So encourage you to get together, think about what you want to say as a team rather than applying separately. This is just a single application for each team. So make sure you all get together and are comfortable with what you're submitting before you hit submit, again, by May 8th. I believe that is the end. So at this point, we are open for questions. I see some questions are already coming in. If you have a question, there's no audio on our end, so we won't hear you if you speak, but you can go to the bottom left of your screen where it should say type message here and type in questions, and those will show up on our screen, and we'll get around to answering them in just a few minutes. I think the first question just came in, which says, do you have any advice on the application process? I'd say best advice for the application process is to make sure that your team membership really focuses on meeting the requirements that we've set forth. When we've done programs like this in the past, we've sometimes had a team that's really, from my perspective, all people from the arts world, or maybe it's all people from the transportation world. This is meant to be an interdisciplinary kind of program, so I really want to make sure you have people from both sides. I will say that we've had very successful workshops and projects run with teams that have been led by someone in the transportation side of things, maybe a civil engineer, and others that have been led by an arts administrator. So it's not necessarily a requirement to have the lead be the local arts agency or anything like that. And you'll notice in our application form, there isn't even a field to list who the lead is, so you can really have anyone become the lead and serve in that role. A couple other questions coming in. Is there funding for projects associated with the fellowship? So with this fellowship, we're looking for teams to come together working on projects that are already separately funded. We are not directly providing any funding to projects. That's been different depending on the projects we've worked on in the past. Some projects we have provided funding, some we have not. In some cases, we're actually funded to work on projects, so we kind of run the full gamut. In this project, our funding supports our time, the facilitators and the teachers who are going to come to the in-person convenings as well as the online convenings to work with all the fellows, as well as travel funds for the fellows. So the fellows will be able to travel to our in-person convenings. We'll pay for flights, we'll pay for meals while you're in town for that, as well as lodging, but there won't be direct funding going into the projects that you are working on. A couple other questions coming in. I had a question about whether or not teams from Minnesota or Washington still being eligible, and whether or not it would be unlikely that we would fund a project in Minnesota or Washington, given that I mentioned earlier that we're already doing work in those two states. This is not, those projects do not in any way impact the ACT Fellowship. We do quite a bit of work in a lot of places over and over again, and that is totally fine for us in this case. So if you are a team in a city or town in Minnesota or Washington or any number of the other places that we often find ourselves working or are currently working, that is totally fine. I'd say the same thing is true if we've worked with you in the past, and we've worked in a lot of places, sometimes for a few hours, sometimes for a few years, and everything in between. You're also eligible. If you have any questions about that, you're welcome to reach out to me to talk directly, but no one is excluded from this opportunity, regardless of whether or not we are already working in your community or have worked in your community in the past. Got a question about if a team is selected and somebody leaves, would it be okay to replace that person? That has definitely happened with us in the past. We know people move around all the time, administrations change. It's hard for us to require everybody to stay in their job, given that people have personal and professional reasons for leaving their job that we can't, of course, control. If that does come up, we just ask that you find somebody else to replace them, and we know that doesn't always happen overnight, and that sometimes positions aren't filled immediately. So my short answer to that is that it happens. Things don't always go as smoothly as we'd like, so we won't kick you out of the fellowship if somebody leaves. We'll just work with you to hopefully identify somebody else who can make it to the remaining meetings, however many there are, and hopefully get you back up and running after that. Let's see. The question about, are projects considered to look at transportation needs across cities considered, or are only local projects eligible? That's a really good question. This is one of those complicated questions when it comes to doing transportation projects at the local level and having a fellowship that's really meant to be focused on the local level. Of course, the nature of transportation projects is that they often don't fit within the fine, invisible lines of one jurisdiction. We totally recognize that and don't want necessarily people to think about their projects in an isolated way like that. So the short answer is that this is meant to be done on the local level, local being a somewhat flexible term in this case. And I guess the way I would describe that is that if you have a project that is, let's say BRT, since I talked about that a lot before, that extends across a jurisdictional line from a city into the surrounding county, or one county into another county, or across two different towns, that's totally fine as long as the people working on that project are really represented on the team. We're less interested in something that's focused at the state level, or certainly the federal level as well, or something that's covering the majority of an entire state. But if it cuts across the line, it involves more than one community, that's fine. If you have questions about that and you're not quite sure if your project really fits, I encourage you to reach out to me, contact us, and we can do the best to answer that question. Let's see. The question, are there particular topics that are currently underrepresented in this work that we're particularly keen to explore? Always nice to be asked how we feel about things. That's always appreciated. It's a good question. Off the top of my head, there are a few things. This contradicts what I just said, but one of the things we were really excited to work on that we hadn't found happening was work happening at the state level, which is why we're doing the artist in residence programs at state DOTs. Ignore the fact that I said that, because of course this is not a state level program. We've really found that, especially through our field scan work, that there hasn't really been much involvement in the arts sector at large on newer mobility options, whether that's micromobility or autonomous vehicles, or honestly even TNCs, ride shares, Uber, Lyft, those sorts of things. Whether or not we really have a preference for that versus more traditional pouring of concrete and hardscape kind of work, I don't think we really have a preference. It's sort of a personal interest and something I'd be excited to see. And I know there's so many cities that are, city DOTs, of course, that are exploring that, those issues with curbside management and permitting of these kinds of micromobility options and siting of them in the public right-of-way. And from our perspective, we think there's a lot for the arts sector to offer to those conversations and those debates and those decisions. So I would be excited to see proposals coming in that tackle those issues. But having said that, we're not necessarily going to have a strong preference just for those kinds of projects. But that's really what comes to mind for that question. A question about committing to travel for all three meetings. Yes, you do have to commit to travel to all three. That's an important part of the fellowship. So if you have a team that you can make it to the second or the third in-person meeting, you would not be eligible, and that's really mostly for both your own benefits. You really won't get much out of the program if you don't come to the meetings, as well as everybody else, since everybody really will learn from each other. So if we have a whole team that doesn't show up to a meeting or two, then everyone else suffers, unfortunately, as a result of that. I know there are probably dates on here that for many of you don't work. We had to pick dates just to get the program up and running. We understand that there could be something happening in your own community on some of those dates that's outside our control. We hope to do this again. We hope to do other similar programs again in the future. So I encourage you to stay tuned if for whatever reason this option doesn't work for you. Good question about, are there specific outcomes that we are looking to see? Yes. I'd say if you read about what we worked on with our state-of-the-art transportation trainings, that really covers a lot of what we're looking to encourage to see happen. We're looking for stronger partnerships. Our goal is to work with people who are working together but are not necessarily, haven't developed strong relationships across, let's say, a DOT and an arts council, something of that sort. We're looking for those relationships to be stronger. We're looking for projects that are initiated by an arts council to, in some cases, benefit the transportation infrastructure where they're located. And we're looking for transportation projects initiated by a transit agency or DOT to have an interesting artistic or cultural component that is beneficial to the communities where they're located. So we want really people to think more holistically and to work with people who are trained in other disciplines to help them get to that point. We have a question about somebody who is an owner of a small business focused on placemaking. Would they qualify as an artist partner or for a group? Yes, absolutely. You can run a business. You can be an artist who runs a business. You can run an arts organization, a nonprofit, for-profit, and you would definitely count as a member of the team. Someone asking about 10 to 15 fellows versus 10 to 15 teams. I may have misspoken. Hopefully I didn't, but the total number will be 10 to 15 fellows. So not 10 to 15 teams. It's a, I guess, relatively small group of people. So only a few different cities will be selected, getting us to approximately a max of 15 total people. A question about whether or not the project that you're working on has to be identified before the time you apply. Yes, it has to be selected. I'd say the only way you could get around that is if you have a couple different projects that are selected. If you, say, have 2 or 3 different projects you are all working on or will be working on, and you're trying to decide which one is the best one, that's something we can focus on at the beginning. But if you have no clear funded project or planning effort or any other reason to be getting together with the other people on your team to work on something, then that is less good of a fit. Someone asked about where they can find past examples of ACT Fellowship projects. Short answer for that is you can't, because we've never done this before. It's a brand new program. But having said that, the state-of-the-art transportation trainings, which are covered in both the webinar and some blog posts on our website, as well as similar blog posts and webinars on the Cultural Corridor Consortium. While they weren't part of the ACT Fellowship, they were part of other programs with similar goals and somewhat similar formats. Those are the best cases to look at. A whole bunch of other questions coming in, just scrolling through to see what else we have not answered yet. There's a couple of questions about people living in one place versus working in another place, or wanting to put together a team where there might be someone in a different city that's part of the team. We're somewhat flexible on that. You don't have to live in the jurisdiction. This is not, local funding or something that requires a residency option or anything like that. So if you live outside the city but work there, that's totally fine. I think that's what that question was about. If you have a team of a few people who are in one city, one town, one place working on a project, and you want to bring someone else within your state working in a different place, as long as you all are the kinds of people who are getting together in between our in-person convenings working on a project, that's totally fine. I'd say that might be a case-by-case question. If there's somebody else who is part of a different team, but you're trying to make them part of your team, but they're not really part of the project you're working on, then that's less of a good fit. Let's see. There's a question about connecting fellows with funders and whether or not that's part of the fellowship program. I'd say, and this is something I guess I should have mentioned at the beginning, the content of all the lessons that we'll include in our in-person and virtual meetings is not 100% set. And the reason we do that is that generally for all of our fellowships and learning academies and other kinds of convenings, we like to know who we have that's going to be coming and like to know what everybody would like to learn. You'll see in the application process, there's a number of questions about what it is that you want to get out of this. The last thing we want to do is plan a whole half-day lesson about something that nobody wants to hear about. We have lots of ideas about things we think you should want to hear about based on other workshops we've done in the past, but a lot of this will really be tailored to the individual people and the cities that come together. If we end up with a cohort of a few different cities that are all working on similar kinds of BRT projects, and we're going to focus a lot on that and not talk about rail at all. If we end up with everybody interested in discussing micromobility projects and that's the focus, then we probably won't talk about BRTs very much at all. I have to assume that everybody will want to talk about funding. I can't guarantee that now, but we'll almost definitely include a component on that. Directly connecting people to funding, I'd say that's probably a little bit of a step beyond where we'll go, but we'll definitely hear from funders. We'll definitely explain where our other projects have gotten funding, and people, when they present case studies and other examples of projects, will include those connections as well. But it does not come directly with funding, put it that way. I have a question about representatives from transportation agencies. Can they be staff members of the arts-related branch of that agency? So somebody who runs, I think they mean a public art program for a transit agency. Yes, that definitely could be a great fit. So somebody who's employed by transportation agency or transit agency but does the public art side of things. That definitely could be a good fit. Another question about living in one place versus working in a different place, but asked in a slightly different way. So if somebody works for a transportation agency in one city, but then lives in a different city and wants to put together a team of people working in the city where they live, even though they don't have an official professional role in that city. I'd say that could work as long as the team you're putting together does involve the people who have some authority over decisions. And I'd say this is true for anyone in this sort of position. There's a few people who ask this question. I think it's more, I guess I'd say people are coming at it from the advocacy side of things. Maybe they're just involved in their neighborhood association or other professional organizations, but they don't necessarily work day to day in that city. That's fine. We work a lot with advocates and people who sometimes volunteer their time on projects. A lot of great transportation projects get their start in that way. They're drummed up by those sorts of people. That's totally fine as long as you're able to get your DOT, your transit agency, and local arts agency or equivalent for all those organizations to the table as well, so that we're not just working in a vacuum outside of those decision makers as well. We had a question about rural communities and whether or not rural communities are eligible. Absolutely. I didn't mention the population size of some of the towns that I talked about earlier, but Mariposa, California, for example, has just over 2,000 people, rather small rural community. We've worked in a number of different rural communities. I've worked in rural West Virginia and Indiana, and all the way from the East Coast to West Coast and in between. There's no preference for size of the community. There's no preference for the size or the scale of the project. So you won't get bonus points if your project is a rather expensive project versus getting bonus points, your project being a much more affordable version. Same is true with population size of your community. We generally like to have a mix, so we will keep that in mind. At the same time, we like to have a cohort of people who can learn from one another. We've found, even our last cohort, I hope I'm not speaking for anyone by saying this, but even having Los Angeles and Dothan, Alabama, which, believe it or not, are fairly different places with different priorities, different issues, different transportation projects, those people were able to learn quite a bit from one another over the course of a year working on their projects. So we generally feel that people, even going from rural communities to urban communities and from the South to the West Coast and so on and so forth, can still learn a lot from each other. One other question about designers, landscape architects, I think was the case used, whether or not they count as artists. This is one of those tricky gray area questions. Sort of if you identify as an artist, we don't necessarily Or I'd say we definitely don't only think of people who went to art school and graduated with a BFA or an MFA as being artists. So more of a self-identification. If you work as an artist, your perspective is one of an artist. Many artists are trained as designers as well, or sometimes work as designers or architects. If you look into our bios of the 2 artists who are serving as the artists in residence at Washington State DOT, one of them is actually trained as an architect, which is also an artist. So it's not a disqualifier by any means. I'd say it's more, if you don't identify as an artist and you're not interested in having a conversation about the arts, then that would be a disqualifier, but certainly you could be a landscape architect as well. There's a question about, another what I would consider a gray area question, consultants who are leading initiatives for DOT, would they count as a transportation agency? I would be open to that. I think that's often, this is one of the things where you set the rules for the eligibility requirements and then recognize that things often work rather differently in the real world, and there's often people who are consultants embedded within agencies for quite a bit of time leading major initiatives, and that's just the way the world works, and we totally recognize that. If you can make the case that you are a person who is directly responsible for managing a project, making decisions about the project, if you're not officially employed full-time by that agency, that is okay. We're not going to be sticklers in that sense. We really want a good group of people coming together who have good ideas, want to share those ideas with other people within their own community, as well as people in other communities, regardless of whether or not their official status is as a consultant or staff member. I think unless other questions start popping up, we just have one more question we haven't answered yet, and that was about communities who are interested in doing this kind of work but have not started doing this work yet, whether or not that would be eligible for this fellowship opportunity. I'd say that's probably not the best fit for us. We're looking for people who have started doing the work already. I'd say if you are in that position where you're just thinking about doing this, you're excited to dive in, your better bet would be to either contact us and figure out where to get advice on getting started, but also to keep an eye out for that date in February when I mentioned we're going to have another open call for communities to apply to receive a state-of-the-art transportation training. That'll be a workshop where we come to you and bring people together. A lot of icebreakers, a lot of meeting one another, a lot of learning how to work together for the first time involved in that opportunity. So if you've never done this kind of work, that's probably a better fit for you is to wait until then or contact us separately. I'd say if you can't wait or don't want to wait, you can definitely contact us. We have other options where we run workshops in the meantime, and we could certainly talk to you about putting together a program like that. Before we wrap up, I'll just pause for a minute. If anyone else has any other questions, type them into your chat box in the bottom left. Going once, going twice. Okay, I think that is everything. We certainly would be happy to hear from you if you have other questions that you think of later today, tomorrow. One more question just popped up. Will there be a recording of today's meeting? Yes, there will be a recording. We are going to send out a link to a YouTube link, a video of this recording, both the audio and the video of the recording. So you'll be able to go back and listen to this. If there's other people that you're thinking about applying with on your team and they weren't able to join today, you can always share the link with them as well. So stay tuned for that. Everybody who signed up for the webinar, whether you did or did not tune in, will get that link emailed to you in just a couple days. So with that, we're going to wrap up. Again, our application deadline has been extended to May 8th. We know it takes a little bit of time to put these teams together, so hopefully that'll give you enough time to get those teams together. And definitely reach out to us, email, or give us a call if you have any questions. You can find all of our information on our website, t4america.org or smartgrowthamerica.org, looking for the Arts and Culture program on those pages. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you, and good luck with your applications.